Good morning, everybody. And as Liz said, my name is Sean Brodie. I'm a partner with PwC. My career is in two halves. So I spent the first 20 years of my career with the revenue commissioners doing VAT audits and all that wonderful stuff. And then I've spent the last 20 years with PwC trying to help people through VAT audits and all that kind of stuff. So I would advise across all the areas of VAT, both industries and services and goods. And so that's me in a nutshell. This morning, Liz has asked me to look at the VAT aspects of education and training. So I'm just going to share my screen there and share a few slides with you. So to start with a little bit of good news. So we've all been taken up with Brexit, obviously. But I suppose from a services perspective, the impact of Brexit is quite minimal. I mean, the huge impact on Brexit has been around goods. So I would also say that the Northern Ireland Protocol, it only relates to goods as well. So from a services perspective, we don't have to distinguish between Northern Ireland and what we've affectionately come to know as mainland UK or GB or some connotation like that. So it doesn't matter. It's UK, which would include Northern Ireland from a services perspective. So bar a couple of admin type issues, really the game for services hasn't changed that much. Some of the reporting may have changed a little bit. And I would say over time, because the UK is not now bound by the EU VAT rules, I'd say we will see a growing divergence between the way the UK approach things and the way Ireland approaches it. So really, if you are dealing with service providers in the UK over time, there will be a need to make sure that the UK position hasn't moved on some of this stuff. When we start looking at the whole area of education and training, and of course, wouldn't a consultant start by saying this is very complex? Well, of course you would, and indeed it is. And you begin to wander into areas as to whether the service is consulting or advisory type service or education in nature. And while the two poles, the black and the white side of this, can be quite clear, very often what we end up looking at are services that are in the grey in the middle and trying to decide whether they fall into the education rules or the consulting, advisory or research type rules. It also impacts on conferences, because you can have certain conferences that would be classified as education events and would have special rules applying to them. So just really starting with the caveat that it is complex, but what I've tried to do for this morning, and Liz has cracked the whip in terms of the available time, is to focus really on the types of services I think would be the type of services you guys would be looking to procure. So when you're looking at how a service is treated for VAT purposes now, there are really kind of 4 steps to this. First is to categorize the service. And what I mean by that is really trying to decide whether the service is physically performed or whether it's now what we call an electronically supplied service. And I'll come back to that in a minute. Once you've done that, then you can decide which place of supply rules apply. So that'll determine which jurisdiction is going to apply the tax, if there's tax to be applied. Then you have to decide whether you benefit from an exemption in that jurisdiction or not. And then finally, it's who accounts for that VAT. So just taking those 4 areas, as I say, by category, I mean whether the service is physically performed or not. So again, at one end of the scale, somebody comes over and runs a physical training program where all the people meet in the classroom in Ireland, or all your people go over and attend a classroom presentation in the UK. That's what I mean by physically delivered. As we've seen with all that's happening at the moment, there's often a drive now to providing these services online. And you begin to wander into the area of VAT known as electronically supplied services. So if I can give you a quick example, if the person that would have stood in the front of the class now instead broadcasts live and people just log in as we've done today. This would be regarded as a physically delivered service, okay? But if, on the other hand, we pre-recorded a load of lectures and made those available online, where people could log in whenever they wanted and download and access that material whenever they wanted, that would be an electronically supplied service, okay? And the way they're taxed differs from a VAT perspective. And the key test is whether there's more than minimal human intervention. So that's whether the person is giving the lecture live, or it could be that you have access to a tutor, or it could be that you can send questions or emails which will not be responded to by a robot. So it really does depend on what's on offer in terms of the course, okay? The second aspect of this is determining which jurisdiction is going to have the taxing rights, okay? And here we have to really distinguish between two categories of customer. So the first category is a business customer receiving the service for the purpose of their business. So if a business decides they need to put 10 employees on the course, then it's the business is the recipient. So even though the employees are attending, it's the business is receiving the service. And we distinguish that between the other category, which is really everybody that's not in business. Generally, that's private individuals, but it can be certain bodies as well that are just not regarded as being in business from a VAT perspective. So it could be a charity, it could be a federation, it could be somebody like that, as I say, that's just specifically not included in the world of VAT, okay? So there's two general rules. So generally then for business to business supplies, the general rule is it's taxable where the customer is located. And generally it's the customer you will find will then tax it, self-account or apply a reverse charge for those services if they're provided on a cross-border basis. If it is the consumer, then the starting point is that the service is supplied where the service provider is based, but there are exceptions. And the two relevant exceptions here are: one, education, because the rule there is it's taxed where it's physically delivered. So if somebody comes over here and they're physically running a course where individuals are signing up and going to it, then they'll have to register in Ireland and deal with that because it's taxable in Ireland. And then electronically supplied services, there's a whole special set of rules that apply to those, but generally the supplier will have to tax it where the consumer is based. So they will always ask you, where are you resident, where are you established, so they know which jurisdiction they need to deal with that. When it comes to the rate, then both Ireland and the UK have exemptions. So broadly in Ireland, we have an exemption for schools, colleges, university type education, and for vocational training. And I'll come back to that in a minute. But basically, unless you clearly fall into one of the exempt buckets, you default out to the standard rate, which is 23% in Ireland. So the key trick here is to make sure the service is in one of the exempt buckets, because if it's not, then it's taxable. In the UK, you'd actually wreck your head trying to read through the way they have shaped their rules around this. But very, very broadly, their schools, their colleges, anybody providing what they call free education, or anybody providing education under government funding programs is exempt, and basically fee paying or commercial is then taxable. I'm taking a bit of a liberty there, but that'll give you a broad idea of how they look at it. And then the last point then is, well, okay, we've established what jurisdiction, we've established whether it's exempt or taxable. If it's taxable, who has the responsibility for taxing it? And in a business to business situation, if it's an Irish supplier to an Irish customer, the Irish supplier must charge the VAT. in a business-to-business situation, if it's a UK supplier and an Irish customer, the Irish customer will deal with it under this reverse charge mechanism, which I think you'll be familiar with, but it's basically where you have to self-account, you charge yourself the VAT and then decide if you're entitled to a deduction on it or not. In the case of a B2C, it'll always be the supplier. And the only question is whether they charge you VAT where they're established, i.e. UK VAT, or whether they have to register and charge you Irish VAT, but it'll always be the supplier. So just two quick examples. Here we have a UK service provider, the customers in Ireland delivered program, then the reverse charge will apply, and it doesn't actually matter whether that physical program is delivered in the UK or Ireland. It'll be reverse charge in Ireland. And so the question then for the Irish customer will be, does it fall into an Irish exempt bucket or not? Okay. If it's an electronically supplied service, again, it's reverse charge, same thing. If it qualifies for exemption, grand. If not, you need to self-account and decide whether you can claim the VAT back. Scenario 2 is where the, again, service providers in the UK, and it's an Irish-based non-business customer. Physically delivered now becomes important. So if that's in Ireland, then the supplier must decide if it's exempt or taxable. If it's taxable, they must register and charge you Irish VAT. And then if it's an electronically supplied service, again, the supplier, it will be Irish VAT, but they need to decide whether it's exempt or not. So just looking at that issue of exemption or not, broadly in Ireland, young people's education, schools, colleges, universities, that type of programs, they benefit from the exemption. Private tuition benefits from exemption. The key one here is vocational training and retraining, where the conditions are met. And those conditions are really important, because if the conditions are not met, it defaults to being taxable. I'm going to come back to that in just 1 second. And in the UK, look, again, broadly the same, in the sense that the schools, colleges, universities are exempt, and then vocational training where it's provided by what they call eligible bodies. So your big issue over there is whether the service provider is an eligible body or not. So just finally, broadly then, what is the vocational training exemption? So in Ireland, it's been defined as you see there, instruction relating directly to trade or profession, as well as an instruction aimed at acquiring or updating knowledge or vocational skills. So it's all about the person and their skills, and whether they're upskilling, improving or maintaining those skills, and that they can be used on the job, or that it's retraining and used in a new job or a new self-employment. Okay. And again, there must be a clear trainee-trainer relationship. In the UK, again, not horrendously dissimilar, but they've just come at it in a different way. So what they're trying to distinguish here is between, and here's a good example, right? If I have an interest in cooking and I sign up for a week's cookery school out of just I like and I'm interested in cooking, right? Then that's a taxable, that doesn't benefit from the exemption. But if I'm a chef, or I want to train as a chef, and I do the exact same course, then that course would be exempt, because now it's enhancing my skills for the purpose of my vocation or employment. So you can see that the context here can be very, very important if deciding whether it's taxable or exempt. So that's broadly it, everybody. As I say, fortunately, Brexit hasn't impacted services as badly. Northern Ireland and the UK, all the one and the same. Big issue is whether the person receiving the service is in business or not in business. And then the last thing then is, if you have the taxing responsibility, whether the service you receive falls into the exemption bucket or not. That's it, Liz. Happy to take any questions if people have them.
Hi, thanks very much, Sean, for that. That was very, very clear. Sorry, nobody, I forgot to say earlier on, but I stuck a thing into the chat about that if anybody has questions to stick it into the chat, and then I will ask them afterwards. So I didn't have any questions there, but sorry, I do have one question myself, and it's probably not relevant to everybody else, but I'll ask. As the Skillnet, I'm not a kind of a body as such on my own, so we're not VAT registered. So does that mean that if I use a supplier from the North or the UK, that I should pay the VAT on that, and then it's not claimable back?
Yeah, so what should happen then, Liz, if you're a body that's not regarded as in business, okay,
Yeah.
and you're using a UK service provider, okay, and the next question then is it an electronically supplied service or is it a physically delivered service?
Okay, it'd be physically delivered, but from the UK.
From the UK.
Yeah.
Okay, well then that would be taxable under UK rules.
Okay.
Okay, and because you're not in business, you wouldn't be able to recover that VAT. So the issue then would be, does it fall under the UK exemption or not?
So if it's for, no, they would be commercial providers.
So it's likely to be taxable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Ground.
But is it not that the service that you're giving or the training that you're giving is upskilling the people in their job?
That would be the case, but it's in the UK, it's different.
It's slightly different. And look, the thing is, as I say, the UK rules are fairly complex. So
Yeah.
it may be that it does benefit because it will in part depend on, I know you're saying they're commercial, but they may fall under various recognitions. As I say, if they are this eligible body,
Yeah.
then they can benefit from the exemption. But if they're not, and there's a whole set of criterion on the eligible body.
Okay.
If it was an Irish provider, then as long as it was vocational training, it would be exempt. Yeah.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah. No, that's fair enough. Does anybody else have any questions? I've nothing coming into chat, or are you all happy with that? I think